We are firmly in the era of the English translations, English editions of the New Testament. There's so many of them today, we don't even think about it. If anything, we think, man, why are they making all these English translations? And I'm really not sure myself, especially when I look at some of them. But man, it's what do you call it? What do they call that when it's when you have a lot, when you have riches, it's the curse of the riches. There's a phrase for that. I can't remember what it is. But that's where we are with English translations or any other language that we want. The Bible was, if you will, locked in stone as far as dissemination with the printing press in the 1400s. And so that made obsolete the need to make hand copies. We can't even imagine, right? I mean, if you wanted a copy of, imagine what it would have been necessary in the early centuries or the middle centuries. If you wanted a copy of the whole Bible at your home, and essentially it was impossible.
No, couldn't do it.
And so there's a motivation right there to go to church, right? Because maybe your church did manage to have a copy of it, so you wanted to consume the Word of God, and in order to do that, you had to go to gather together. And so what happened there was, ironically, with the with that kind of need for a public reading, you have the creation of these gatekeepers who begin to own. When you own the Word of God, so to speak, and you get to parse it out, or what's the word for it? Begins with a P. Farm it out to people. When you get to control the Word of God, man, you can do things with that power. And that kind of happened. And by the time of the reformers, the 1500s, the church had an absolute lock on the written Word of God. Only it wasn't in people's languages, it was in Latin. And so Erasmus was the one, of course, that caused the dam to break. Did I put that on this thing here? Yes. Erasmus was the one who caused the dam to break. And so his Greek New Testament, 1,000 years later, 1,000 years after the great uncials that we'll talk about today, Sinaiticus and Vaticanus and so forth, unleashed a torrent. We're looking at it from an English point of view, but you could do it in other languages for the people that care. I care about English, so that's what you see. And so you can see what happened, and the direct descendants, the genealogy, that great divide that was crossed. You could put Latin above the Greek right there, and the great divides being crossed from Latin back to Greek, and then into English. And the Herculean efforts that went into making those transition points happen. And the first one, for our purposes, was Erasmus, who was a Roman Catholic scholar, one of the great intellectuals of his day, who in 1516, against the opposition of the Roman Church, even though he was a Roman Catholic, he may have even been a monk. So was Luther. But against their objection, he created a Greek text of the New Testament for the first time in 1,000 years. And now we're just waiting for that third leg of the stool. You have the printing press, and I made this up, so it's probably going to fail. I'm going to find out that there was really 4 legs to the stool or something. I don't know. But you have the printing press. You need the printing press. You need a Greek text to roll off the printing press, and then you need people who are willing to stand up, even though they might get their heads cut off, to produce an English translation of it. And that man was William Tyndale, and that happened within 10 years of the Greek text. And you have your 3 legs to the stool: printing press, a Greek text, and then the man who was willing to take the chance and produce an English text. Did you want to say something? No? You were going like this. Okay. And so there you can see it breaks down that both the Church of England and the Roman Church should have just conceded to the inevitable and go, okay, if we can't suppress you, if we're not going to be able to suppress you, we might as well support you. It's a line from the movie in another context. If I can't control you, I might as well support you. And nobody was going to be able to control this because there was this hidden pent-up demand for the Word of God that was centuries in the making. And then finally, with Tyndale, I'm not even sure. I'll bet you Tyndale was. I don't know what Tyndale thought. So who knows? But who could have known that once he produced an English text, what would happen next? Where you put the Bible in the hands of people, and eventually the King of England himself is going to have to concede, and within a year become responsible, take on the responsibility. The gatekeeper now takes on the responsibility of producing English text. And so we move from Tyndale to Coverdale, the Coverdale Bible. You can see how fast it goes. Within 10 years, 11, 12 years of Tyndale. The Matthew Bible, those are all sanctioned by the Crown. The Great Bible, 1539. Geneva Bible, 1560. Bishop's Bible, 1568, which will be the King James Bible in 1611 will kind of be a revision. The King James translators didn't work anew. They built on the legacy before them. And so in the King James, you see sort of the crowning achievement of that English translational work that started with Tyndale. Of course, they used Erasmus, but you don't recreate the wheel. So you use, we'll see that again in the 1800s. You build on others' work. That's how history works. People building on the work of the people that came before them. And so that's the tradition up to the King James Bible, 1611. Where am I at in my notes?
One thing that I've read that King James wasn't actually overwhelmingly accepted by many until well into the 1700s, or maybe around the 1769 translation. The Puritans held true to the Geneva Bible.
I didn't know that. Pastor says the Puritans used the Geneva Bible. Well, eventually, which is part of the point today, that bridge will be crossed, and in a sense, we'll have a new kind of gatekeeping. It's one of the great ironies of history. What Erasmus did was he took on a 1,000-year-old, 1,100-year-old tradition of authority of the Latin Vulgate, the translation that Jerome created in 405 AD and handed down. He would have been probably horrified because he would have wanted the translation work to continue and improvement. But by the 1500s, it reigned supreme, and the gatekeepers ensured that was the case on penalty of death, which is exactly what happened to William Tyndale. And probably only because of the protection of the authorities in Germany, the same thing might have happened to Luther when he translated into German. So it was not in the first place, the 1500s was not in the first place a theological revolution. In my view, in the first place, it was a textual revolution. It's the academic stuff that we kind of dismiss as unimportant. I mean, who cares, right? Who cares what Erasmus and who cares what these guys were doing with translation efforts and so forth? Well, we do, because it's why we have an English Bible. But that was the thing. You put the Bible in the hands, back to the demand thing. He created this Bible. Tyndale did, and you had that famous saying of his that I will cause the boy behind the plow to know more about the Bible than you do. That's literally true, because it's so ritualistic. And the modern sermon that we talk about, the freedom of being able to do that, you colored inside the lines. If you were preaching, if you were standing up in front of a congregation, you colored inside the lines. You didn't test the edges in those days. And so Orthodoxy had an entirely different, the Renaissance, the Enlightenment will challenge the very idea of an orthodoxy in anything. So, Galileo did with, Kepler, Copernicus, these great scientists, thinkers who challenged the conventional thinking of the day. They colored outside the lines, and some of them paid the price, including Galileo. But by doing so, they subverted the gatekeepers. And so what happened was Tyndale produced his English New Testament, challenged the gatekeeping, and now it could not be controlled. And he tapped into, whether he knew it or not at the time, a demand that had been probably building for a long, long time. And so by the time you get to the Enlightenment, and you can just go, the tools are there, the technology is there, and now there's just Bibles everywhere. Except that the King James will be a new gatekeeper of sorts, which we'll get back to. And so that's how I think of what Tyndale accomplished, was he put the first, he cut that first hole in the gate of the gatekeepers that the people after him would follow on. But what he couldn't have known, but which God knew, was that there was this demand for English Bibles that would have to be fulfilled. And we now have a printing press that can produce them. And we have scholars out there, because it was one of the great periods of scholarship in history, in Western history, was the 1600s. So many of the great names that you are familiar with are 15 to 1700s. If you study that kind of thing. So this is the translational work leading up to the great achievement of the King James Bible, not a version. It was his own thing. Now, how they thought about, they did do revisions, probably the way that they thought of it. And so the King James Version is going to go through revisions, many of them, even up to 1769. That'll be a key one, which we'll get to. But let's take a look at what I got. What have I done here? We're going to get back to this. I handed this out. We'll walk through this a little bit today. That's how I think of it. The legacy of Erasmus, from his New Testament to the Nestle text of 1898. And then finally to the Nestle Allen text, 28th edition, which is the most current critical text, which if they're going to do a new English translation today, they would use almost certainly the Nestle Allen 28th edition. A lot of the ones that you read in English Standard Version are either going to be 26th or 27th edition. Because by the time you get to 26th edition, you're not making, you're really tinkering at the margins. Well, maybe this word, maybe they mean this form of the word and not that form of the word. You're into that sort of thing. If we have time, we'll talk about a little bit about some of those peculiarities, like Romans chapter 5, verse 1. Should it be, therefore, having been justified by faith, we have peace with God? Or therefore, having been justified by faith, let us have peace with God? That, ironically, constitutes one of the great debates in in text criticism right now. That tells you where we're at. Let's do both. Let's have it, and let's try to have it. How about that? Let us both have it and try to have it. Okay. Let's see. Let's move forward here. Our bigger timeline was, we're going to go through this eventually too. I wanted to wait to the 1800s to talk about comparing manuscript evidence of the New Testament with other ancient writings, because we haven't even got to the flood of manuscripts yet, because they haven't, on our timeline, they haven't been discovered yet. Actually, you have that. Yeah. Does anybody need that one? Let's do it later. You have this. I've turned it into a white version too. Basically, it's just a list of manuscript evidence for some of the more important ancient writings. How did we get them, and how does that compare to the manuscript evidence for the New Testament? It's very common. It's very well known out there. Nobody denies it. But this is the main timeline we've been working on. Let's just go back and look at this for a second. There's slideshow. This looks dumb at home. This looks dumb over the Zoom feed because you're seeing what I'm seeing, but they're seeing the full screen. This is what we've been walking through. And now we're into this orange section where the floodgates have been open and you're seeing vernacular language Bibles, whatever the language might be. So we're right in here.
Right where?
Oh, sorry. We're towards the end there in the orange. Tyndale and then to the King James 1611. Here. This is where we are. Okay. One more thing about Tyndale. The Tyndale legacy. Just pulled them out. Did we go through this list? Did we already go through this list?
Yeah, I think so.
What about words? Tyndale words. You will be surprised.
We didn't do that one.
These are words Tyndale either created or popularized. And I believe that first one he coined. Atonement. At one mint. Because remember the purpose of Tyndale's Bible. If I live long enough or whatever, I will cause a boy behind the plow to know the Bible better than you. So who was he writing for? The boy behind the plow. And so he created, he wrote that way, and one of them is that first word, at one mint. Amazing. But those are some of the words that he either he created or you don't see and then you do see because he popularized them. They're important words. Mercy seat, scapegoat, Passover. Doesn't look like that in Greek. The word for Passover. Doesn't look like that in Greek for atonement either.
What's the Greek word for Passover?
Pascha. The Paschal lamb. I have to go back and look at them. What?
Those words were never before.
Some of them he created, like atonement. Now, if you talk to him, he might say, no, we used to sit in the pub drinking pints and we use that word all the time. I don't know. He might say that, but the reason we know about it is because Tyndale used it.
So it's not like when people translate for a language today where they use language that they understand, like I was reading thing about new tribes, and they were talking to a group, and they used the debt payer to describe Jesus because they understood a debt.
Yeah.
But they didn't understand a sacrifice.
Yeah. So Sally's saying that in translation into languages of vernaculars around the world, when they translate, they have to think for the people they're writing to. And so one of the terms that was created, it's just a compound word, right? Oftentimes it's putting two words together, but referring to Jesus as debt payer. We don't necessarily need that, but you're looking for a word in another language and that's the material you have. So that's the sort of thing, but that's how that happens. That's exactly right. And as long as it's faithful to the Greek, then that's great. Okay. Let's continue down the, you have this now? If you don't, say something. Was this just handed out? Yeah, it's a lousy diet. It's a lousy one because I did it this morning. I ran out of time. But I just wanted to capture the Greek and English tradition that came from Erasmus, because that's really who it came from. And there's things missing from this, of course, but one of the things you'll notice in this diagram is the lack of English translations between King James Bible between 1611 and then finally 1901. And that speaks to the that speaks to the authority of the translations, particularly of the King James, but of others before that. And so that authority in the wider Western world, particularly of the King James, was pretty dominant. It became known as the Authorized Version. So, you know, and in the English Crown still has that kind of power. So yeah, they could have made another translation 20, 50 years later. But you just, you know, I don't know. You don't want to necessarily take on the English Crown. So if you can't get approval for it, if they say, no, we don't really want to do that, then, you know, maybe I'll just keep my mouth shut. Unless you're another Tyndale who thinks it's that important to make another English translation. Yeah.
Wasn't there another English translation prior to American Standard or
Yes.
revised version?
Yes, I didn't have
1880?
1881. Yeah, I think it's 1881, but you could be right.
That's Westcott and Ford.
Yeah, that's not a coincidence.
No. So they were scholars from the American version and the British version worked together. And they didn't agree on stuff. I had to do a report on this back in college. And so the American group took their version, published it in 1901. They had to wait 20 years because of copyright.
So there was an English translation in 1880 or 81 called the Revised Version. I don't know the text tradition of it. I'm not sure. I should have looked that up. I was looking at it a little bit this morning. But that's your next English translation is 1881. So as far as new traditions, you go from 1611 to 1881 as far as English translations go. New English traditions, 270 years. And then of course, if you talk about our last 50 years, ever since, let's just call it the Revised Standard Version in the 1950s, it's just been, how many are there? How many English translations of the New Testament are there? So, you know, I think there's hundreds. There might be thousands.
And
Okay,
I was just gonna say some of the reasoning behind the translations. It's curious.
I started the recording, right? Yeah. Not that the world would end if I didn't start the recording.
I think you did.
So,
All right. Okay, let's get into the 1800s. What a fascinating time. Whole bunch of stuff happened that you probably don't know about that was critical to what you're holding in your hands in terms of your English translation, whatever they are, except for the King James. Well, even the King James, I suppose. King James went through 4 or 5 revisions. There was one within 10 years. I didn't write them down. I didn't mark them down because I ran out of room and time. But if you look at this period of time right here, there was a bunch of revisions of the King James. And then finally, the big revision, the standard, let's call it the standard King James Bible, was 1769. It was the Blaney. What was that his name? I forget the name. But anyway, that King James is the one you're holding in your hand if you read the King James. And so there's several ironies about today with regard to the King James movement, and it is a movement where the King, not only is the King James authoritative, but it is the inspired Word of God. I told you the story about how I got shocked into the reality in 1984 when I walked into a King James church and couldn't believe my eyes or ears. Changed my life. They'll never know the effect on me and how transformative it was in the negative sense when I walked into that church. It was an independent Baptist. If you see independent Baptist church, free will Baptist church, these kinds of things, you're looking for potentially King James. Or even if you're seeing something on YouTube and they just repeatedly don't refer to the Bible, they call it the King James Bible. That's another clue that you're dealing with a mindset that the King James Bible is the inspired word of God. However, the problem is, I think most of them think that what they're holding in that they're holding, they call the 1611 the inspired King James Bible, which has gone through, which certainly if that's true, the translators didn't know that. They weren't thinking that. So then there's all these revisions, and then finally the 17th. So even the Bible they're holding in their hand is not the 1611. That's the first question. Well, which one are you holding in your hand right there that you think is inspired? Is it the 1611? Is it the 1630 whatever, the late 30 whatever, the 1769? Which one are you holding in your hand right there? Which one is the inspired one? So that's the problem you have with that. And the second irony, of course, is we have a new attempt at gatekeeping. So we went 1,000 years under the Latin gatekeeping, Latin Vulgate, which in the English-speaking world, effectively, there was a new gatekeeping with the King James Bible, or the King James tradition, which wasn't going to be broken until the devils themselves were incarnated in the form of Westcott and Hort. And we'll get back to them in a minute.
I remember hearing as a teen or early adult anyway, conversation, a missionary who was involved with Bible translation. And somebody asked them, you translate these Bibles into these other languages from King James, right? So why would we do that? We translate from the Hebrew and Greek.
Yeah. Yeah, the issue is with the King James people, you should be translating from the King James Bible. Go ahead.
The original language that we know of is Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic.
Greek in the New Testament, Hebrew and Aramaic, probably, yeah, Aramaic or Hebrew in the Old Testament. I don't know enough about that to.
Those who claim that the King James Bible is the original or the authorized version, what do they do with those older manuscripts that
Corruption. Well, that's
what
another.
they're translating from is corrupted?
I don't pretend to try to explain it in a rational manner. It's, to my mind, the definition of irrational. But that's the irony, right? Erasmus, what the claim, I think, is not so much that Erasmus was inspired, but that the translators were. It's like the Great Reset. So yes, Erasmus had to do text criticism. He had a handful of copies. All of them had variants, not many, and he had to make decisions about which variant to take. And when he got to the end of the book of Revelation, he's missing the last few verses. He just hopped on over to the Latin Vulgate, translated it back into English, and that's how the King James 1611 finishes. If somebody wants to open their King James, if they have one, and tell me whether the last couple verses refers to the tree of life or the book of life, we can find out if they fixed that problem.
Also, there's another, in our definition of biblical, Bible accuracy, we have this phrase, in the original language, in the original manuscript. Or
Yeah, so we're not going to have time probably to talk about inspiration. I was kind of hoping we could. Inerrancy and inspiration. This will mess with your head on inerrancy and inspiration, right?
yes, it will.
Because what we're relying on is hundreds of, we're relying on unknown, non-professional copyists that for 1,500 years to have copied it. They were not inspired, in my view. And then you're relying on editorial committees who are maybe not even Christians, trying to recover the original text of the New Testament. They were not inspired. So how do we understand an idea like inspiration or inerrancy? And the answer is that the original text the text that came, the final draft that came off the pen of Paul or Sylvanus or Tertius or whoever was writing, that's inerrant and inspired. Whatever he wrote is the definition. And to the extent that we recover that original text, our Bible is inerrant. That's what we mean by inerrancy. Inerrancy means our Bible, in my view, our Bible, that the text that we have is exactly the same as what Paul and Peter and Luke and so forth wrote. That's inerrancy. Did we get it 100%? We've been through 28 editorial revisions of the Greek text of the New Testament, where these experts fiddle with this and that. So, you know, that's in my view, I'm happy. Because man, they're tinkering around the margins right now. Nobody's saying, except for one guy, whose name I'm not going to mention, who's an important scholar. Almost nobody thinks the original text is unrecoverable. Because the reason you can't say that is because if you say that, you have now lapsed into complete and wholesale historical skepticism and agnosticism, because you can't know anything about the past. Because the New Testament text is the best case scenario by an order of magnitude or two. So just don't talk about Plato, Aristotle, Socrates, Homer, you know, the Iliad, the Odyssey, Josephus, the Jewish War, his Antiquities, Tacitus, Annals of Imperial. We wouldn't know anything about the early Roman Empire. Eusebius, almost everything we know about the early church comes off the pen of a Eusebius who wrote in the 4th century about the time of Constantine. All goes away. We can't say anything about the past if you follow that path. So I don't take it seriously because the scholars don't. We have all kinds of writing today, assuming that we recovered these texts. We'll talk. Let's talk about that list we were talking about. I showed you earlier. We'll talk about that later.
Gary, my New King James says the Book of Life and the Tree of Life.
It says both. Yeah.
According to Bible Gateway, all 3 versions of the King James have Book of Life. So the authorized King James and the King James 2021.
So they left it as tree of life,
Does it mean James 2:21?
except for but wait a minute. It says tree of life. Hold on a minute. Book of life. If you go to this is the debate. We got ourselves into a sidetrack, but it's my fault. The end of Revelation here.
You have to do the individual first.
So the New American Standard and the English Standard and so on and so forth. Let's see. Tree of Life. The New King James Version says the Book of the Tree of Life and the Tree of Life, the Book of Life and the Tree of Life.
If you just do the verse, so do 22:19, you can do all English translations. You go to the top.
Earlier in chapter 22, verse 2, it says Tree of Life. And verse 14, Tree of Life. And
Book of Life,
then
King James.
19, it says Book of Life from the Book of Life.
A ASV 1901 is the Book of this prophecy. Book of this let's see here. More modern translations. English Standard. Interesting. Oh, there it is right there. Sorry. Tree of Life, English Standard.
You're still blessed.
Yeah,
I ain't gonna quibble.
no.
I'm happy to be in either one of those things, the book or the tree.
Part of our understanding of inerrancy has to do with the person of God, the character of God, and that He preserves His word for us. That's why we have such confidence in it, because of who God is.
Any study of the word of God has to have that particular unit in it, where God is the keeper.
Yeah.
You talk about the gatekeeper, God is the giant gatekeeper.
Amen.
Yeah.
He's the one that keeps it pure.
Yeah.
Even those translations that happen in far off countries where they
Yeah.
are translating it for people who've never seen the word of God.
Yeah.
I believe those are.
Okay.
kept.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah.
Wholeheartedly agree.
Okay, hurry up and see if we can get through Tischendorf. Okay, that takes us to the 1800s. With the 1800s, you're going to see revolution in textual scholarship because there's going to be all of these finds in all of these old papyrus fragments like P52, which was the early second century John stuff. They're going to find all that stuff in Egypt. Oxyrhynchus. Nag Hammadi will be later, which I don't know enough about to talk about right now. But that's all going to be uncovered in the 1800s. And there's going to be so much of it, it's still not cataloged. There are that many finds. But for our purposes, more importantly, there was this man named Constantin von Tischendorf, German, of course. And he graduated from Cambridge or Oxford or something, biblical scholar. And he was he went on an odyssey. He was a manuscript hunter. And there's probably some not accidental parallels between this man and Indiana Jones. They got a lot in common, which, you know, I don't know that Spielberg has ever said it before, but man, there's just too many it's too close. So he ended up at a place called, I don't know why he went there, but he ended up at a place called St. Catherine's Monastery, which is about as remote as you're going to get. And it turns out this monastery had been active since the 500s. So Tischendorf goes there. And they have a library. They're monks. They copy, they keep copies, they store copies. He goes there and he doesn't discover, because they've been there people knew about him all along because the monks had been there, but he sees these manuscripts, he sees these fragments and these parchment manuscripts and so forth, and he knows what they are. And so do they. Well, the story, the traditional story is that he saw them burning. They were burning them. They were using them for kindling. And so he was trying to save these manuscripts from destruction. So he managed to get his hands on a few leaves of one of them, because they were parchment. They were books, unsealed. And he takes them back to Germany. And he realizes what he's got, that this is the oldest copy of the New Testament in existence. And so he spends 1844 to 1859, he spends 15 years trying to get his hands on the full manuscript. And so he finally he puts the pressure on the monastery by getting the Tsar of Russia, because it's an Eastern Orthodox church. Can you believe that? Your English Bible is that dependent on manuscripts held for 1,500 years by an Eastern Orthodox monastery? Talk about an irony of history. Not how I would have done it. But anyway, he gets the Tsar of Russia to put the pressure on the monastery, and they end up with the manuscript, or almost all of it. So now what you have is the vast majority of it in St. Petersburg in Russia, some of it in Leipzig, Germany, and the rest of it still at the monastery. And so the problem with his story, because he comes off as the hero, right? So there's the seediness of it. It's kind of, you see that in Indiana Jones too, right? This antiquities market, and it's this underbelly, and they're making deals in the bar and so on and so forth. And so the problem with this story about saving them, that he saw them in a pile where they were being used as kindling, it's parchment, leather. You don't use leather as kindling; it doesn't burn. So the monks said, no, he signed an agreement that he would bring it back, and he never brought it back. And so there's this kind of dirtiness that enters the story. Maybe he just got a little overcome. Maybe it would have been perfectly fine if, okay, we know it's there. We will just go there and copy it and leave it right where it is, and it would all be in the same place at St. Catherine's Monastery to this day, not burned. You don't have a library of this stuff if you're using it as kindling. It is sacred to these people to guard this stuff. That's what they do. So Tischendorf then manages to copy Sinaiticus and publishes a New Testament, Greek New Testament, in 1859. Does anybody else know of an important event that occurred in 1859? Coincidentally. It was 1861, wasn't it? Civil War. Darwin's Origin of Species first edition was 18. It's the most important event for modern science, roughly in the last 200 years, 1859, and it's also one of the most important events in the history of recovery of the New Testament text, 1859. Anyway, I thought you would like to see the library. I saw a 45-minute or an hour video on this library. Let me try to find one here. So here's the monastery. Someday. Looks like almost like a mock-up, but sits at the foot of what is of the traditional site of Mount Sinai. Yeah, which I don't believe that's Mount Sinai, but I don't care. That may be why they were so careful. They figured that's what they were there for. So that's perfectly fine with me. But let's see. So look at it. Let's take a look at a picture of the I mean, these manuscripts are just unbelievable. This stuff. Why didn't this stuff get destroyed? Well, who's going to go out there and destroy it? In the middle of the Sinai Desert. I've seen the Sinai Desert. You want to look away. It's so forbidding and desolate. Well, who's going to traipse out into the sand with the money that it takes to do that? Because you're not going to do that by yourself. And then do it a bunch of times because you're so obsessed with this project of recovering this manuscript because you know what you had. Well, a guy like him, Von Tischendorf, who was rich. But nobody else is going to do that. So, it survived. It's somehow survived, not just Tsarist Russia, but the post-Tsar period, Bolshevik Revolution, Leninism, Stalinism. It not only survived that, but at one point, maybe in the, was it before or during World War II, they were so hard up for money that they sold the manuscript except for a little bit of it to the English. And it ended up in an English museum. Which is where it sits today. Is 100,000 pounds, which is $30 million or some number like that in today's money. The English bought it. But it survived everything that happened in that part of the world. All the sands of Egypt, all the sands of Sinai for 1,500 years. Because Sinaiticus is dated to 350. 350, AD 350. Within about 300 years of the New Testament period. And somehow made its way to this monastery and then stayed there, guarded by these monks in a desolate place in the world for 1,500 years till it was finally made public and could be used to create a modern critical text, which is what we have in the 28th edition. This is an unbelievable story. So that's the library. If the video that I watched is absolutely worth it. You want to watch the
28th edition, what is that? Oh, a Greek.
the Nestle, now Nestle Island text, 28th edition. Yeah, that's the newest edition. Not different hardly from the 27th or 26th, except they're now beginning to use AI.
That's one of
Yeah.
the.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons that they are so sure of translations today, that they are accurate, is the consistency between the translations of the.
Yeah, take any King James version, including the 1611, if you can understand the English, take it, then take the ESV or the NASB, put them side by side, and tell me what you think. Those are entirely different manuscript traditions. The King James is the Byzantine majority text tradition. That's Erasmus. Late manuscripts, a handful of them, no more than about 7. The ESV, NASB, RSV, all these well-known NIV, they're all Nestle Aland critical text, Sinaiticus Vaticanus tradition. Not majority text, Byzantine, but that Alexandrian tradition I was telling you about that disappeared early. 2 different manuscript traditions. You can look at the translations. Perfectly, if all the rest of them disappeared and all I had was King James, I'm going on with my life. I listen to it all the time because I like Alexander Scourby in the way that his audio. So anyway, this is St. Catherine's Monastery. They did a modern renovation of it. I hope they don't go too far with that. It's not just biblical books. It's all kinds of books. You know, can't really see it, but plus for some reason, but you look at how old these manuscripts, these books are. Brian has one from the late 1700s, but look at this. They're sitting on shelves. And you can go there if you want to wade through the desert sands. You can go there and spend some time in the St. Catherine's Monastery. Fascinating. They take their work they're scholars. They all have the traditional Eastern Orthodox garb they wear, but they're all they're scholars. And the monks are very bookish. We have this image of monks as asceticists who sit there and take, you know, in the freezing cold and don't eat and stuff like that. Well, there's also the scholarship. There's also that other side. They're very scribal. So that's St. Catherine's Monastery. You're welcome. Thank you. Okay, let's go back to our timeline, see how far we can get. That's von Tischendorf. He puts together a Greek text of the New Testament in 1872. That's his final product. What did 1859, he published, I don't remember the difference between 1859 and 72, maybe it was versions. But anyway, he produces a text a published text in 1872. Didn't keep it all in my head on this. Could have wrote it down. And then there's the next great event. And again, the dam is going to break, right? The gatekeeping is going to come down on the Greek side as well, not just the King James. But now on the Greek side, we're going to move from Erasmus. Now you have von Tischendorf's Greek text based on Sinaiticus. And now you have 2 scholars from England, top scholars, B.F. Westcott and I forget Westcott and Hort. And in 1881, they produce a text of the New Testament. And the name of it is, they're so confident, they call it the neutral text, meaning unbiased or something, but they're so confident in it, the name of it is the New Testament in the original language. That's their name for it. And so they put out their text of the New Testament. Then another man by the name of Richard Weymouth, he puts out a text of the New Testament in 1892. There's a lot of work to be done. They're discovering manuscript fragments from the early days. You know, they got the great uncials now that take decades to wade through and edit and analyze. You know, do you want this? We've got Vaticanus out there, the other great uncial. Two most important works for your purposes are Vaticanus #1 and Sinaiticus. Those are the two most important. So he produces a text of a Greek text of the New Testament. Now you have these three. Now what's going to happen is a man by the name of Eberhard Nestle will come along, and he's going to produce a Greek text of the New Testament. And his approach is going to be to use the three previous ones and compare them. And where two of them agree, he will use that as his for his edit or for his text.
So he's comparing the three names above him?
Yes. Yes. And if he couldn't get agreement on any of the three someplace, I'm not sure what he did. I guess he made his best call. I don't remember. But you can see the dates there. Those were transformative years, 1872 to 1898, to begin what will end up being a single Greek text tradition that can now be improved upon as more and more discoveries are made of ancient manuscripts, and we learn more and more about ancient Greek and so forth. And you can get editorial committees like they did for the King James, but now it's all about those manuscripts. And so, but this is how close Sinaiticus and Vaticanus are to what we'll call the original text. 80-some% of the modern Greek text that your English Bible your non-King James Bible comes from is basically Vaticanus. Thank God for Vaticanus. Do you remember who the guardians are of Vaticanus? Who holds it? Who owns it? It's in the name. The Roman Catholics. Another one of those great ironies of history, right? We are so indebted to the Eastern Orthodox for Sinaiticus and the Roman Catholics for Vaticanus. It was in the Vatican in the 1400s. I don't know where it was before that, and maybe nobody does. How these manuscripts survived this quiet period between the 300s to the 1500s. Nobody knows.
Only the hand of God.
They did. So here we are. So now we have the Nestle text, 1898, which will result then in the first, what we could call modern English translation, the American Standard Version of 1901. And at this point, with Westcott and Hort, basically they are credited with, if you will, the overthrow of the King James. With Westcott and Hort, with the publishing of their text, now that's when the Erasmus's Greek text will fall out of favor as far as scholarship goes, and with it, the King James, because there's going to be a whole new translation history or translation tradition and Greek editing tradition that's going to arise from the Nestle tradition, which is based on not the majority text like the King James and Erasmus, but the Alexandrian tradition like Sinaiticus and Vaticanus. Now, we'll close with Westcott and Hort. You heard me say at the beginning of this that Westcott and Hort are the devils of the King James only movement. I'll give you a hint. I'll give you a sense of that. Do a search on YouTube, Westcott and Hort. One of the most important works of biblical scholarship in history, two of the most important biblical scholars in history, period, But when you when you put it in YouTube and see what the videos are, occultists. And then you can see them you can see right here, this one here is capturing the war between the Erasmus and Vaticanus and Sinaiticus. That's what this one is. You can see it right there. Vaticanus and Sinaiticus on the right, and then Textus Receptus on the left in that top video there. I watch a lot of Daniel Wallace. Go down a little bit. Bridge to Babylon Uncovered. 1881. What happened in 1881? Westcott and Hort. What is Babylon? Revelation. Babylon. Then there's Jaws. I'm not sure what that's doing in here. Westcott and Hort's Demonic Creation. There's a defender. The occult connection with modern Bible translations, Westcott and Hort. Why? Because I think the vast majority, I think Westcott and Hort are in agreement with the modern critical text, like overwhelmingly. So their work survives in the modern critical text. Did Westcott and Hort do what they were hired to do? Yes, they did, but that's not according to these people. Father Lost in Doubt, what do we got here? The occultic background of Westcott and Hort. But you know what you don't see is, what I wanted was a video that explains their contribution to biblical scholarship. There isn't one. It's all these ones about how they're demons and occultists and so on and so forth.
So what is your thought about Westcott and Hort?
I just said it. They're two of the greatest biblical scholars in history. Nestle owes them a debt of gratitude, and we owe Nestle a debt of gratitude because we have a critical text that we can trust. Occultists and modern Bible versions, Jesus is the word with quotes, I don't know, man. It's really that's a car for some reason, a truck. False doctrine, Vatican deception. They don't like Vaticanus anymore than they like Westcott and Hort. KJV controversy. They would wake up today, man. They would go, what? They would look on YouTube and go, what? They weren't occultists. There was another Westcott who wasn't a occultist. And to this day, they won't give up. They have to insist that it's this Westcott that was the occultist, not the other one. So, I don't know. It's fascinating. Okay, that's about it for today. We actually got to this, so maybe I'll go back and clean up some loose ends on this. But now we're ready to talk about modern translations. But you can see how instrumental, transformative from Erasmus 1516 to Nestle 1898 is, and where our text is going to come from. I don't know if everything I said was right, but they were words, and I used them, and I used a lot of them. So I'm going to go ahead and shut down now. Hold on.
Right.
Oops. I just shut down the whole thing. Oh, should I?
Wow.
See you, Nate and Naomi, if you're still out there. I think I screwed it up.
Thanks, Gary.